Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, Instagram. Welcome to today's Khatam Khwajagan on this, the 22nd of October 2020. I hope everybody is well, wherever you are watching this from, and things are going well for you, and people are getting into the spirit of Rabiul Awwal, the month of the Prophet ﷺ. And this is the month in which Muslims traditionally celebrate Mawlid, the birthday of Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. And I thought with that in mind, it might be worth, so also it was my wife's birthday yesterday, and thank you for all the birthday wishes for my wife from everybody who gave them. But this is something which, over the years, I've noticed a lot of Muslims have been discussing. Sometimes it's just genuine curiosity, and at other times it's a condemnation for anybody who celebrates birthdays. And whether that be the birthday of a loved one in your family or a friend, or whether that be the birthday of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. And there tends to be a lot of people within our community who are questioning this. And some people think it is wrong to celebrate birthdays. And they have their reasoning too. I mean, we can't say that they don't have their reasoning. Their reasoning is that as we are all getting older and we're getting closer to death, then what do we have to celebrate? So they think that because we're all getting closer to death, now this is true of every single human being on earth, however pious or not pious they are, we're all getting closer to death. But there are those who think that because we're getting closer to death, that we should not celebrate any birthdays, whichever birthdays those are. But from my perspective, I feel that they fail to see that birthdays are a celebration of life. And if you celebrate a birthday with pure intentions, you are celebrating the life that Allah has given you, or the life, wa alaikum assalam, or the life that Allah has given someone else who you care about, whether that be a loved one, and whether that also be someone who is still walking amongst us or someone who has passed away. In the case of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, a large section of Muslims from all around the world celebrate his birthday, even though Prophet Muhammad ﷺ passed away a very long time ago. Because we love and care about the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and the life that he was given, we want to celebrate. And Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is not unique in this particular respect. It's not the only birthday that people around the world celebrate for someone who has passed away. Celebrating birthdays are celebrating life. And if you do not celebrate life, then you are not thanking and appreciating the gift of life that Allah has given you, or that Allah has given someone else. That said, within Islam, Mawlid is a practice which is optional in Sharia. It's not in Sharia, it's not something which is compulsory, it's not something which you have to do. So it is also true that if anybody says that, then they are also crossing a line of understanding as well, in that they are saying something is mandatory when it isn't. But at the same time, if we call ourselves Muslims and believe in the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ as the Prophet of Allah, peace and blessings be upon him, and we believe in the revelation which Allah gave to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, how can we not celebrate his life? And more to the point, how can we be against celebrating his life? Okay, it's one thing to say, I don't agree with Mawlid, and I'm not going to celebrate it. But it's quite another to then go and tell everybody else that they mustn't do it, and to condemn them and say that they are not Muslims if they do. You see the difference in these two standpoints. It's one thing to stand back and say, I'm not going to celebrate Mawlid. But if you then go around and then you condemn everybody else for celebrating it and saying that they are outside of Islam, this is, astaghfirullah, this is going far too far. But if we just take a step back from established practices within the community, if we take a step back for a moment from the theological side of things and just think about it, how can someone, anyone, be against celebrating the life of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, especially if they are Muslim? See, everything we have of Islam, the Holy Quran, all of the Hadith, all of the traditions that we have within Islam, it begins with the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So, if knowing this, knowing that our deen, our religion that we live and hopefully we love, knowing this, how can we not celebrate the life of the man that gave it to us? The life of the man that started it all off 1.5 millennia ago. How can we not do that? In some way or another. You know, perhaps maybe the julus, the marches, is not for you. Maybe some of the ceremonies that people practice have become a bit dated and you don't want to celebrate it in that way, or you feel uncomfortable with it. But in your own way, or as a group, to in some way celebrate the life of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it's part of Islam, and how can we not do it? In one way or another. It's interesting, I've found over the years that there are some groups of Muslims who they say, oh no, we don't celebrate Mawlid. Mawlid is not part of Islam. And they even make a lot of accusations and say that Muslims do things on Mawlid which we don't do. Things which are haram. You know, some people say that we get drunk or we do other horrible things, astaghfirullah, things which we don't do. But what we do is we'll organise, you know, some communities they'll organise a march through the area and they'll walk around making dhikr of Allah. In other communities they will sing salawat. In other communities they will have a meeting and come together, maybe have a party where they will sing salawat, do some zikr and have a cake. Culture will vary and the practices will vary because of that. Because, you know, what maybe people in part of Indonesia feel comfortable doing, maybe some people in Jordan don't feel comfortable with, or people in Morocco don't feel comfortable with. But in one way or another, they're all celebrating Mawlid. But then these groups that then say that we should not celebrate Mawlid in any of these ways, and they don't do Mawlid. I've noticed so many of them, they will organise conferences on the life of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So they won't organise Mawlid al-Nabi, but they will organise Sirat al-Nabi, or something similar. Well, what's the difference? This is hypocrisy. If people are saying on the one hand that you can't celebrate Mawlid, you can't celebrate the life of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you can't organise these events where you tell events from the life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and, you know, say prayers for the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and do dhikr and salawat and ask for blessings upon the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But then they do it under another name and call it something else while condemning us for doing that. These people are confused. And so any of us who do celebrate the traditional ways of Ahl Sunnah wal Jamaat and practice Mawlid, we should not be concerned too much about people who are very confused about their religion. Why would we be? We have good teachers, we have good practices, and yeah, maybe it's true some of the cultural aspects could be brought a little bit more up to date, and there's nothing wrong with it within Islam. You know, if you want to have a modern cake and, you know, sit down on chairs and do salawat in that way in a nice comfortable room with your family, and celebrate Mawlid in that way, that's still Mawlid. It doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be done with, you know, foods from other countries or with, you know, cultural aspects which you don't feel comfortable with. But the actual principle of it, of celebrating the life of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, of thanking Allah for sending the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ to us, to teach us, to guide us, and to guide forebears who passed on this message to us and taught those who taught others, who eventually taught us. And we should be appreciative of all of those people. None of us are Sahaba Ikram. Not one of us. They lived 1.5 millennia ago in Mecca and Medina. We don't live 1.5 millennia ago in Mecca or Medina. Allah sent us to be born into this time, into the countries and places where we live today. And we don't have to live 1.5 millennia ago. We were created for this time. So there's no use us today trying to pretend that we are Sahaba, or trying to pretend we are somehow equivalent to the Sahaba. We can take inspiration from them, and we should take inspiration from them. But obviously they would have done some things back then which were relevant to their time and place. I mean, how many of you today ride a camel? You know, to go to work, to go to school. How many of you ride a camel? Even people in the Middle East don't ride a camel on a day-to-day basis anymore. They use cars or use public transport. We are not living in those times. So this means there would be some things which people did in the time of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and just afterwards, and even for a few centuries after that, which were of those times. But there are things we can learn from reading about them and how they actually practiced Islam then, that we can apply today, whether we are using camels or cars, trains, aeroplanes. We can update using the wisdom from that time, but we can't practice some things exactly as they did back then. And it also doesn't mean that we have to restrict everything we do to only those things that people did back then. Because if that were the case, we wouldn't be able to use cars or aeroplanes. I wouldn't be able to do this Sohbet and zikr now using Facebook and Instagram. I mean, this is a religious activity. If there's no innovation in religion, what am I doing sitting here talking to you on Facebook and Instagram? That's innovation. That's a kind of bid'ah. But without it, with everybody in lockdown and people connected in different countries around the world, we would not be able to connect. And this isn't unique to me because I'm some Sufi guy using Facebook and Instagram. Everybody does it. The Salafis do it, the Tabligis do it, Muhammadiyah do it, everybody do it. So they can't turn around and say, oh yeah, he's some Sufi guy, that's why he's using Facebook and Instagram. But technically, in fiqh, this is bid'ah, this is innovation. It does not mean it's haram, not in every case. The Quran today is compiled in books. Even the ones that are compiled in Arabic, this isn't the original form of the Quran. The Quran was not originally a book. It was a recitation. And that recitation was written down. And later it was compiled into a book. And originally it wasn't even written on paper. It was written on other material. And later, when paper came to the Middle East, it was written down on paper. So today, if you read the Quran and you are using a book printed on paper, or maybe even a smartphone or a tablet or a computer display. This is bid'ah. And because you're doing a religious activity, it is bid'ah in religion. Does that mean it is haram? Well, most sensible, reasonable scholars in most schools of thought would say, no, it's not haram. So why isn't that haram, but Mawlid is haram? When what do we do on Mawlid? We read Quran. We organise events to discuss the life of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, to educate people on the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. We do dhikr, the remembrance of Allah. We read salawat. We ask for blessings upon the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. It is a prayer of blessings, asking for Allah to bless the Prophet Muhammad and his family. Peace and blessings be upon them all. How is this bid'ah? And yet, me using Facebook and Instagram, people reading the Quran on smartphones, that is not bid'ah. You see, we have a crisis today in the general people's understanding of Islam, that people think things are... Hello, Elizabeth. That people think things are wrong and are haram or bid'ah in religion when they are not actually wrong or haram or bid'ah in religion. And if we go along like this, then with the way things are changing, like I said, I'm talking to you on Facebook and Instagram. You know, people are using satellite TV and all this. I mean, if we really went along on that tangent and carried on going that direction, all of this would have to stop eventually. We would not be able to learn the knowledges that we need to know for the times in which we are living. We would not be able to teach the religion and to practice the religion in this time. So it actually all comes together, because if we actually look at where the really strong sentiment against Mawlid comes from, and we look at those groups and the way that they actually approach the religion, they are narrowing it. And if we keep narrowing it, eventually the path will become so narrow that it will not be possible to walk on it. Whereas it's supposed to be a wide path that all Muslims can walk it. It's not supposed to be a narrow path that's like a knife edge that no one can walk on it. So really we need to think about these things and reflect, educate ourselves to understand Islam better. And here I am talking about myself as much as anybody else. With learning, there is no finishing point. There's no end point. If all of the oceans were ink and the trees pens, all of this would be exhausted before finishing writing about Allah. So what this means is, when it comes to learning, there is no end. There is no end to it. Allah created so much, revealed so much. And even the Quran is a fairly small sacred text in size. But when you actually read it, and as you understand it, you could write huge encyclopedias on the Quran, just expanding upon the meaning that's already there. And what this also means is we should not be afraid of learning. We should not be afraid of new knowledge, new understanding that we have not encountered before. Because which of us knows everything? Which of us knows all that there is to know about any subject? And Islam, religion, are among those subjects. But they're not the only ones that we should be learning and studying. So there's a lot to take in here. And I hope we can go away from this realizing that we all have a lot to reflect upon and to learn, and not to be so quick to condemn. And I'm not even condemning those that they say we shouldn't celebrate Mawlid. I am not condemning them. I think they misunderstood something. And a number of them will be quite sincere. And that's why some of them are quite passionate about pushing what they are saying. Which is another reason why it's very important that when we counter these arguments and these lines, that we do so in a diplomatic way, in a way that is based on information, is based on knowledge, and it's using wisdom to be able to explain, to teach, to encourage people to do their own research and to learn themselves, so that hopefully people can overcome these misunderstandings together and at some point converge to a better understanding. And all of us have a lot to learn. It doesn't matter which group we are part of. It doesn't matter where we're from, and it doesn't matter how educated we already are. Everyone has a lot to learn. Like I said before, if all the oceans were ink and the trees were pens, and even if you look within any library, if it's a well-stocked library, and just look at the number of books that are there, and know that that library only contains a small fraction of all of the different titles of books on this earth. Or you look on Amazon.com and look at the books, the list of books that are on there on any subject. No one's read all these books. So even the experts in all of these subjects still have a lot to learn. Not all of them are humble enough to admit that, but it is true. So how can anyone adopt a really rigid position on something and say this is the only way, this is the only way to understand things? And anybody who doesn't understand things this way are completely wrong. And we mustn't listen to them, we mustn't follow them, we mustn't accept anything which they say. The other danger is when you end up in that position and you listen to someone like that, you actually close the doors here, 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 here. You close the doors in front of you. And you can't see beyond those doors that you put around yourself, that you were told to put there. So you actually cut yourself off from being able to research. I've been asked over the years, I mean, we often, as Muslims, we often get missioned to by people of other religions, especially some very passionate Christians. And I've been asked by Muslims over the years about reading the Bible, and whether we should read the Bible or not. I always encourage people to read the Bible, to read the Bhagavad Gita, to read the Dhammapada, to read the Tao Te Ching, to read different books, different scriptures. I've been doing this for over 20 years of my life, and I've found the scriptures themselves to be complementary. Gaining a good understanding of different scriptures is not a danger to us, it's not a threat, it's not something that we should be scared of or worried about. And similarly, when it comes to the works of science, some Muslims feel threatened by modern science because some discoveries have been made which shake up the established order. And as some commentaries made by Muslims in the past were based upon the science of the time, which informed their own understanding, then when they wrote commentaries or when they wrote books on Islam, they included this scientific knowledge of their times in those books, together with the Quran, together with maybe references to hadith and other literature. But it does not mean that those maybe very great scholars I'm not taking anything away from them in their times. But the things when they discussed science as a field has moved on and will always be moving on as we make more and more discoveries, as we come to a better understanding of the cosmos around us and inside of us. So it's by nature, science will always be changing. And if we stick to scientific understandings of things, which are not things which are actually said in the Quran, but it's how things have been interpreted, because that was the scientific understanding of the scholars who commented upon the Quran in the past, or commented upon Islam in the past, then we will hold ourselves back from being fully fledged members and contributors to knowledge today. And this isn't just something which is a problem for Muslims. The very Christians I mentioned earlier that preach to Muslims, they have this problem, and maybe even worse than Muslims. Some of them are so dead against any kind of scientific theory. They don't accept the earth is old. They don't accept evolution. Some of them don't even accept the Big Bang. And they literally believe that sometime around 10,000 years ago, God made out of clay little figurines and breathed life into them, and that is where all humans and animals and all creatures came from. They literally believe that. I mean, what can you do? It's this. These people look very foolish to anybody who is well educated in this time, and not even the people who are experts on science. Just well educated. The people who are experts on science, well, they look really foolish to them. You know, this is knowledge that's based on evidence and research. And we can't just discount it and go with some old theory. Otherwise we end up looking silly. And all of this, I know I started off talking about birthdays and Mawlid, but it actually all comes together. There's a crisis within scholarship at the moment, within Islam, and within understanding things and how we understand things. And this is partly why you've got some people who've took a very hard-line, narrow-minded, rigid view on things, because a lot of them are scared. So that seems like a safe position to like build a wall around themselves, you know, and stand behind that wall. So they got this wall around themselves. What they feel is that's their safe, that's their comfort zone. And that's what they're doing it for. And I can understand that might seem safe, but the reality is it doesn't change the reality. It doesn't change the world around us, whether we believe something is a fact or not. If it is a fact, it's not going to change that it is a fact. And there's no reason to be like that either. Because our scholars in the past, they used the scientific understanding that was available to them in the medieval times, and, you know, in the times before that, and in more recent times, before things started to decline. So there's no reason for us to be using old backwards understandings of things when we have so much available to us today. And hopefully, may Allah grant that we do end up with new scholars coming into Islam, that young people will grow up and become new scholars and will understand things in a better way and be able to combine their scientific knowledge with the traditional, the best of the traditional religious knowledge, and bring things back together. Because otherwise people are living in a crisis, and it affects our foundations, to be how we understand Islam, how we can practice Islam. If people are so narrow on things and cannot accept new scientific developments, new technology, it makes people in a very difficult situation if they try to live in a way which it's so outdated for the times in which we are living. And at the same time, the answer is not to just go completely with everything that's modern and scientific and reject what our ancestors and forebears passed on to us. Because they too had wisdom, they too had knowledge. And we are fools if we lose that. So there are ways of doing things which combine this and bring us to a better understanding. And that can be a good foundation for how we live and how we understand our religion.
You don't know how to read this book? It's my book.
So I think I'll start the dhikr now because time is getting on. Now before we read zikr, we always check our intentions and make sure that what we are reading is purely for the pleasure of God. Nawaitu labiyin, nawaitu lusla, nawaitu kawa, nawaitu litikaf, nawaitu suluk, nawaitu riyada, lillahi ta'ala fi hada jami. I intend to perform the 40 days of retreat. I intend to retreat in isolation. I intend to retreat in solitude. I intend to perform the retreat. I intend to